It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we've got a pretty full show for you guys. We're going to talk about Noche UFC. We're going to talk about TKO Boxing, or whatever that entity will end up being called, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. We are going to talk about the latest court cases filed against the UFC. We told you last week that we were going to be diving into this every chance we get, so we have a little bit of content for you on that. We are going to talk about a little tiny bit about WWE and the rumors about a super fight. Would that be what we call it? I don't know, but there's a rumor going around about a very popular boxer and a very popular influencer. But if you want to get content and you want it all, you're going to have to subscribe because, as you know, about half the show will be behind a paywall. So let your fingers do the walking. Anyway, John, how the heck are you?
Oh, fairly good. Exhausted, though. Very tired.
And you have a trip set up.
Yeah, I got to leave till early tomorrow.
What is early for John Nash?
Well, I mean, it's early in the sense I got to be at the air. My flight takes off at 7 a.m.
Oh. Okay, that is
for early. Vegas. So I'm flying. I'm not driving because I just don't feel like driving there and back. But I'm flying. So that's, between the time of getting up and, getting over there to the airport, it takes a while. So it'll be dark and cold, even in Los Angeles at that time of the day. But no traffic. That's the good news.
Yeah, no traffic. So who's going to take care of the baby? Your Isla.
Well, I have no one here in town except my brother's girlfriend is going to swing by because the cat likes her. She loves the cat. We don't let her know we take advantage of her because she loves the cat so much. We pretend like, it's we're doing you a favor, but she's doing us a big favor. But yeah, that she'll be watching the cat during the day, at least after when she gets off work. So we're set on that. And then on top of that, I was up late last night, early this morning, trying to write something because the cat wouldn't let me write. And I posted something on Uncrowned. They had me write something for them.
Well, tell us what you wrote so that maybe we could get some more people, some more eyeballs on it.
Well, I wrote something about these two new class action antitrust complaints that were filed in Vegas. Kind of a primer, kind of an update, kind of an analysis, all rolled into one. So you can find that on Uncrowned. Hopefully it reads okay. I was out of my mind at one point trying to get that done with the cat all over me. So that's, the dilemma of having a cat.
Try having 3.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, you are going to be in Vegas tomorrow for the hearing in Judge Boulware's courtroom. What is happening there? Because there's a little tiny update that you're going to tell us about, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, any update I can get why I'm there at the hearing too tomorrow, but there is a lot going on tomorrow. That is why I'm going. The judge is going to decide or discuss, or, they're going to go over, at least, I don't know what's going to be determined at this hearing. There is currently a motion filed by the defendant, UFC, Zuffa, whatever, Endeavor. There's multiple defendants now in this case, names. They filed a motion to deny class certification or an alternative strike class allegations. There's that to go over. There's a motion to seal that's been filed by the defendant. There is a motion to compel the defendant Endeavor to disclose or take part in discovery. There's the joint stipulation to address defendant Zuffa's motion to deny class. That is going to be, they're asking the judge to revisit. There is the complaints that were filed, Sirkunov v. Zuffa and Davis v. Zuffa. We'll see if those come up at all. There was the judge today reported that the court, they transferred the Serkinov v. Zuffa case to Judge Boulware. So that's been reassigned to him.
That
So now
was the update I was looking for right there.
Well, that's one. And then we still have the question of, will Davis v. Zuffa be reassigned to Judge Boulware? So there is a lot of stuff that could come out of tomorrow's hearing.
But what we know right now, though, is Judge Boulware did get the Serkinov case.
Yeah, that is officially now under Judge Boulware, and it is being handled, I'm sure, just right alongside the Johnson case.
All right. I have a weird question to ask you that's not in our notes, but it just occurred to me right now. Is there a chance that this could be moved out of the Ninth Circuit?
Well, it'd have to be moved away from Judge Boulware, because the higher court from the Nevada Federal District Court is the Ninth Circuit.
Right. But I mean is, like, could it end up in maybe Texas or some very friendly place? No.
Okay. I mean, look, I would have to ask around if there's any outside weird possibility, but based on anything I know, that would be an extreme unlikely. In fact, I think the only chance that they would, if they lost Boulware as the judge, it would be reassigned to another judge in the district.
Okay. All right. So, now that we know what's going on tomorrow and why you're going to be there, let's talk about what you're thinking about the filings overall, because, you've had the weekend to think about this, and I'm just wondering if you have any additional insight, any additional thoughts on it.
Well, the time I had to think about it, there's a few things that popped in my mind. One is the big thing that came up over the weekend was the release claims. Now, when they settled the Lee class, all the fighters that are collecting from the claims in that settlement who are submitting for claims, they have to release Zuffa of any future claims, except, this was very clear by the judge, any claims for the Johnson class members. So Johnson class members can still go after the UFC, can still take part in the class action, can still sue the UFC, but no other fighters can sue the UFC for similar allegations that were under the Lee class. Now, I point that out because you notice both Misha Serkinov and Phil Davis were members of the Lee class. They were part of that class of fighters that fought in the UFC between 2010 and 2017. I'm sure, because they're not on our list of fighters who have not verified their information, I am sure that they are collecting damages. So theoretically, not even theoretically, they should not be able to sue the UFC for anything else unless they're part of the Johnson class. Now, here's where it raises some questions, possibilities here. One is Misha Serkinov is part of the Johnson class, but now he's filing this separate complaint, Serkinov v. Zuffa, that would take him out of the Johnson class, and he'd represent a whole new group of fighters that have these arbitration class action waivers. And one of the judge's big complaints, and one of the reasons he did not settle did not agree to the original settlement, and why he agreed to the later settlement, is that he did not like that the plaintiffs were not going to challenge the arbitration agreements. And when they said they would challenge it and basically guaranteed it, then he agreed to the settlement. So I guess the question I'm asking is will the judge say, hey, listen, I know I said that anybody that signed the Lee, when we settled for Lee, that fighters would not they would release claims against the UFC unless they're part of Johnson. But Misha Serkinov's a related case in my court. That's the same as Johnson. I'm going to treat that like Johnson. Otherwise, the fighters couldn't do what I told them they had to do, or the plaintiffs couldn't do what I told them they had to do, which is challenge these arbitration agreements. And so Misha will fall in to the Johnson class. And then it's possible also he considers Davis the same, even though Davis is part of the Lee class and should not have the ability to file a complaint against the UFC. The judge might say yes, but he's only doing what I asked the plaintiffs to do, which was to challenge not just the arbitration agreements, but to also go after injunctive relief. And he's doing that on behalf of fighters that if I went back to the transcript, he basically talked about how fighters that the plaintiffs need to go after injunctive relief because if the UFC does have this monopsony power that the plaintiffs argue, then they need to do something to challenge it. And then here's Davis doing that. And so would the judge go, I reject Davis's complaint because technically he was part of the league class. So that's the thing. One thing I find really interesting, one possibility, one thing to keep an eye on.
May I ask one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
On that, is it that they can't file any future claims or they can't sue for damages? I'm just unclear on what you were saying.
They can't file future claims at all. They have no right to sue at all on. Not for different, on a whole different complaint, but under the stuff that falls under the league complaint, you can't sue for antitrust, those type of things. Restraints of trade, it covers that. So, and because otherwise, why would UFC even agree to a settlement? Right? They're like, I'm not going to agree. Fighters could just start suing us for anything else. I want to get rid of this case. So there's that. So I'm gonna actually pay attention, see if the judge says anything about that tomorrow. But that's one thing on my mind, how that's treated. Sirkunov and Davis, the fact that technically they're part of the league class, technically they shouldn't be able to sue the UFC, but they're also carrying out the orders, basically the orders of the judge by filing these complaints. So will the judge, give them? I wouldn't want to say a pass, but say, listen, they fall under the Johnson class because these are related cases. That's one. And then the other thing that came to mind was how much smarter the Davis complaint is than anybody first noticed. I know that I first noticed. It took me a second reading after the show and thinking about it. And what makes it so smart, in my opinion, is one, basically the judge wrote it. They went through, took the judge's class cert order, and then used the arguments the judge laid out of why he was granting class cert to say that's why we're filing this complaint. You laid it out, Judge. This is you brought up the International Boxing Club of New York. You brought up certain restraints of trade, the regulation in boxing, all these things. We're just doing what you wrote in that class cert. So that's one thing that's very smart about it. Two is there's no jury with the Davis complaint. One of the big concerns, as we talked about before, for the plaintiffs is that going to a jury trial, because, people were like, oh, this is a slam dunk case. Is it? The problem when you go to a jury trial for this is you got to get all 8, I think it's 8 jurors for this case. You'd have to get all 8 jurors to unanimously agree with the plaintiffs. And that seems, and if you've been to Vegas, you talk to people in Vegas, that's your jury pool, the UFC hometown. That might be a tall order. So that's a big concern for the plaintiffs all the time is when we go to trial, that's part of the motivation why they wanted to settle with the UFC is because trials are incredibly risky. But in the case of the Davis complaint, they're not asking for a jury because jurors decide damages, not injunctive relief. Judges decide injunctive relief. So this is only a judge. And so they must feel much better about this complaint. And then it also, because there's no damages involved, because there's no jury, this case might go faster than the others, in which case we could get to the judge. If the plaintiffs win, we could get to the judge ordering injunctive relief before the other cases get to the class certification portion. Before class certification is granted by the judge, in the other cases, we could get injunctive relief here. And so if that's the possibility, then this is really threatening to the UFC, so threatening that they might settle the other 3 cases. So where the plaintiffs are worried, as I talked about jury trial, and they're worried maybe appeal on the class cert, and they're worried about these arbitration agreements that they might not be able to overturn. Well, if they can get this injunctive relief ordered before they have those cases done, they might be able to hold this injunctive relief over the UFC and say, forget about the arbitration agreements, forget about jury trial. Let's settle all 3 cases And that way, we, the plaintiffs, don't have to worry about, one, failing to overturn these arbitration clauses and then losing a large portion of the fighters, and two, worrying about how a jury would treat the case. And so we could win. We could settle this case, get paid a ton of money, I'm not billions and billions, but more than they got for Lee for sure, and get some injunctive relief from the process. So that's why I find it incredibly, incredibly smart if they can get a victory in Davis.
Wow.
And so, and then one other thing I want to stress, though, I gotta stress this, because people listen to us, and they used to listen when we talked about the leak case, and they would focus on the billions of dollars in damage and injunctive relief and think, oh, the UFC's in serious trouble. I want to stress, even with the injunctive relief here, if they have to settle and pay, over $1 billion and offer some sort of injunctive relief, the UFC is not at threat of being destroyed by these complaints from Sirkunov or Johnson or Davis, because they're going to settle, and the plaintiffs are going to settle as well, even if it costs them a bunch of money. And two, the UFC is so entrenched in their position. They make so much money. They're so far ahead of everybody else that they can take a major blow and still remain way, way, way ahead of everybody else. That's not going to change. What's going to change is they will not have quite the leverage that, again, I got to go back. Well, will change only if we end up seeing a settlement at the end, not if there's, a victory by the UFC. Nothing happens. But if we do see, Davis injunctive relief order and possibly a settlement, what would change is that the UFC would end up having to pay more than they do now, that they would not have the leverage over fighters that they do now, but they still, there's no way they still don't remain an incredibly massive company making tons of money.
Question, and this
Yes,
will be
go
my
ahead.
last one before we move on. Excuse me. When you say settle, when you say the UFC will probably settle these 3 cases, do you mean financially settle or make provisions within the contract?
They would have to do both. And I mean, they'll settle only, for sure, only if Davis, if injunctive relief is ordered in Davis. There's no guarantee that happens. We just a couple minutes ago had a discussion about, does Davis even have the ability to bring this case forward? We'll find that out soon enough, but we will only see them settle automatically if injunctive relief is ordered. And then we would see them settle, depending on what happens in the other case. If class cert is granted in Johnson, then again, we'll have a settlement before going to trial. What the amount is will depend on what happens in Sirkunov. If those arbitration agreements are enforced and all those fighters are removed, then the settlement will be smaller. If the arbitration agreements are ruled unenforceable and those fighters are rolled back into Johnson, then the settlement will be much bigger. So all that depends on those outcomes. But I was just pointing out that if Davis gets to injunctive relief by the judge, which is, if it gets through these hurdles and gets in front of the judge, it seems more likely that he would order injunctive relief than a jury trial would be a victory for the plaintiffs. Then the UFC, I think, will, at that point, they will kind of panic and settle and pay a large amount of damages to cover all the fighters and offer injunctive relief. And I'm just going to make a number up for injunctive relief. They're asking for 1 year here. They pointed out that Ngannou had 5 years. So let's say they'll make contracts 3-year maximum.
Okay. I think that you're onto something here, but I always think you're onto something, so I might be biased. All right.
I like the bias. I like that you have faith in me.
I do. I have ultimate faith in what you say. If you don't know that by now, then I'm doing something wrong here. All right. So we're going to move on. And we're going to talk about Noche UFC because it got moved. And the reason it got moved was because of construction delays on the arena that they chose for the event. And shout out to Rodrigo Del Campo, who's been covering this thing from the start, who has been warning everybody from the start. He even asked questions directly to a UFC representative at a post-fight press conference and was basically told that they didn't appreciate his line of questioning. But anyways, of course, the construction delays have caused Noche UFC to be moved from Mexico to right here in San Antonio. And now it is no longer a pay-per-view. It is a fight night. So, what's your take on that whole situation?
Well, this is just me taking a kind of like gut instinct here. One is they dropped the ball. I mean, not they dropped the ball, but they were it seems like in denial about what was going on in that stadium. But it also looks like they are taking this as a gift. That's my gut instinct, that they are looking at this like, we are not going to try to put on a pay-per-view. We're going to use this as an excuse to remove it from pay-per-view to put it on fight night. Why? That way Dana White and TKO can again be involved, in at least up front involved. They always were going to remain somewhat involved, but be the point people again on the Canelo versus Crawford pay-per-view. I think they want to get back on that. And they couldn't have done it. At least my theory is the reason they couldn't do it is because Noche is they have a deal. They're trying to make nice with ESPN because they got to negotiate with them for the next media rights deal. They did not want to be seen that, ESPN, you are paying us $20+ million to put on these pay-per-views guaranteed, and we're out here promoting the major competitor on pay-per-view, a Canelo fight on the same night. That they did not want to get stuck in that position. But now that this has moved to fight night, they can go back to promoting the Canelo card without any consequences with ESPN.
Does this signal any trouble for their media rights negotiations?
Well, no, I don't think so, because in some ways, if it looks like it'd be a poor selling pay-per-view, I think ESPN would be happy not to pay them the $20+ million for the media rights. But it does. And I guess the question is, how much does ESPN and these broadcasters pay attention? It does raise the question between this and the fight card the other night, the fight night, is as the UFC kind of ran out of steam with their fighters, that can not just the event was, the stadium not being available, derailing this doesn't mean they don't have fighters, but you have to look at it and say, where are the stars that guarantee pay-per-view sales, right? And on that front, where they seem to be lacking on new stars, current stars that can headline events consistently. I think that is where it kind of represents a problem for them, because if people are paying attention, I don't know if they are. I don't know how much these guys know about the fight business. I wonder if they're just looking at metrics that the UFC shows them. But if they're paying attention, they do have to ask, well, what are we getting if we sign the UFC for this amount of money? Because, if you show us your track record, that's great. But if we look at it, what your current roster is, we might go, you know what? I do not see another 2016 here or another 2021 where you sell a ton with massive event after massive event, which maybe makes the deals worthwhile. But if we don't have something like that, then, the lifespan of the deal won't be worth the amount we're paying. So I think that's where I would say it signals trouble, but that's the part I would be paying attention to if I was a person negotiating with the UFC.
Do you think that there's going to be more instances of Dana White and TKO being spread too thin between UFC and boxing?
I mean, if Dana White's going to be the point person for both TKO boxing and the UFC, and boxing is going to do their 12 events per year, they said they're going to do, possibly more, plus 4 tentpole big events, 1 to 4 super events. So that's 16 a year, let's say. There's no way there's not conflict between the UFC. The UFC runs 42 events a year. That's more events per week, and they both like to run Saturday nights. So you think there'd be, eventually, at least a couple times a year, there's going to be a conflict of events. Now, where does Dana White get, which one does he sell? Which one does he put more effort into selling and being the point person? That's where I think the problem would run into. But I think, TKO, they can afford the staff, they can afford the personnel below the named brand ambassadors that are Dana White and, Nick Khan, the top guys. They have the people to run the shows, I think, with no problem, unless they're really going for cost cutting. Then you got to worry about, are they going to cannibalize and use the same production staff, crews, in which case they could have problems, but you'd think they'd be, they've been around long enough. You think they'd know that they could get a second unit somewhere. So I don't think they'll have problems, except for who's going to be the symbolic figurehead for the event when they start having so many events. That's where I think the idea that they're spreading too thin could come into play. And and they've also built up, this is one thing to think about. They built up the UFC as we've talked about, a lifestyle brand. They made Dana White the symbol, the Mickey Mouse of their Disney World. That he is this flagship. He's the flag figure of the promotion. How are some of the UFC fans going to react when he is putting the UFC on the back burner to go promote boxing? Will they take offense to that? I don't know, but I wonder about that, because the UFC, they've made a fan base that, at least partial. I mean, there's normal people in the fan base, but there's a segment of them that the UFC is their team. And if it's a lifestyle brand, it's also not just their team, it's a cultural thing for them as well. And they might not look fondly at, or get a little annoyed that the UFC is not putting, I should say, Dana White's not putting the UFC front and center.
It's rare that I disagree with you, but I disagree with you on something you said. You said Dana is the Mickey Mouse, but I would argue he's the Goofy.
Oh, well, I mean, whose ears do you see at Epcot Center? It's Mickey Mouse. Dana's face is everywhere. Mickey's face is everywhere. That's the
He's goofy at heart, though. Come on. He's goofy at heart.
He might be a little, he is goofy, but he's a great promoter of himself.
I like the addition there at the end. What did you think of UFC Vegas 107? Not only losing several fights over the course of a 24-hour period, but they also lost the main event literally a minute before it was scheduled to happen. One of the girls walked out and the other one was unable to. So, I mean, that's about a minute before it was scheduled to happen. What was your take on that?
I mean, it's hard to have a take when you had absolutely no interest in that card before, that I didn't watch it. And that the fact that it was a crap card with crap fights because they lost a bunch of fights that were going to be on it, and people still watched it, makes me question people's taste. Because, I do not know why people would have an interest in this card.
But from an optics perspective.
But I mean, from optics, it looks again like I guess the question would be, I don't know. It could be just a fluke show. Although I do think it presents the possibility that, we've talked about that there is not, you lose these fights and then the remaining card, I would say you lose the main event and then you're stuck with a card no one cares about. But did anybody really care about that main event? So
Probably
I can't say,
not. Maybe their parents.
Yeah, so I'm like, I can't argue like, the UFC, they've watered down these events so much that, you have nothing the card is worthless after we lose the main event. The card was worthless with the main event. And so I think that's I can't make any takeaway because it was a worthless card with the main event. It's a worthless card without the main event. So the only takeaway should have been the same, even with the injuries, is that they just put on a worthless card. And yet, I don't know why that doesn't seem to register with a lot of fans. If this was Care Don't Care, how many cares would have been on this card?
0. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would be in the negative numbers. We would be trying to find fights from other cards to care about. That's how bad this card was. But when I say optics, I'm more thinking about, does this look bad to prospective broadcast partners? Does it make it look like UFC can't handle their business? They didn't have a backup, et cetera, et cetera.
But I mean, again, I get back to the card. It should have been a signal to whoever's paying attention before even the injuries, because the card, not only did not have a backup, it didn't even have a main event to begin with. So I don't think there's any lesson to learn from the problems at the card. The lesson to learn was it was a terrible card to begin with, and if people are paying attention, that should be the question that they should be having. And now, even then,
right there.
But even then, we've talked about, we used to say on Care Don't Care, and people aren't aware, Care Don't Care was the show Stephanie and I did with Eugene S. Robinson. We had to quit because there's so many cards that none of us cared about, that it just became a negative show. But I don't even have a problem with that. The problem is these fight nights can be as terrible as they want them to be. And that's not, I don't really care often that these fight nights are bad because I have something else I can do Saturday night. What bothers me more is there's not enough big events. There's not enough events to get really excited for. Either the big fight nights when they go on the road, or the big pay-per-views. And I've said it before, and maybe it doesn't apply to the UFC anymore because, again, they've been trying to make it into a lifestyle brand. But as I said before, the health of boxing or mixed martial art is always dependent on the big fights. It's only as healthy as how soon is the next big fight and how recent was the last big fight. Big fights are what drive casual interest, most fans, to get people excited, to get us talking about it. And so that's the one problem. It's not how bad the fight nights are. I mean, I would like to have better fight nights, but I don't go, it's not the end of the world when they're bad. And I almost prefer when they move all the good fights to pay-per-views. I'm going to buy a pay-per-view, all the good fights, hopefully every fight on there's good. But the bigger problem is there's not enough pay-per-views even where I'm like, I have to see that card. That I'm excited, not just that even like there's relevant fights on it. I'm excited to get that card. I'm excited to watch and talk about it with other people. And that has been kind of somewhat rare this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I said we were going to talk about WWE, and it's a very brief topic that may lead us down a rabbit hole. But TKO's been releasing a lot of talent from WWE lately, like a lot of talent. But it sort of culminated this weekend because they released someone that's a pretty big star. He's been with the company for 17 years. It's R-Truth, aka Ron Killings is his real name. I mean, his last match just a week or so ago, or this past weekend, whatever it was with John Cena. And the whole community is in an uproar over it. And I saw lots of comments, someone saying, for instance, the TKO formula is at it again. We're going to see a lot of cuts, and a lot of stars are probably going to go because they get paid too much. And it occurred to me that TKO kind of operates like a private equity firm. I even tweeted this early yesterday. Do I have the right read on them? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!